Hello, welcome to the corner of Morris and Queen. My name is Chris Green. I'm the owner of Atlantic News, and this is the Atlantic News that is not the television news station, but the last remaining newsstand in Halifax. And we are bringing you interviews with all 6 of the District 7 candidates. We're going to talk with Mr. Aodhan Murphy here today. Aodhan, welcome.
Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Good. And before we get going, just a little bit about voting. If you don't know, online voting has started. It started October 8th. It goes through October 19th. In-person voting, there are 2 opportunities before Election Day, one on the 12th of August, one on the 15th of August. And then Election Day is October 19th. Polls throughout the HRM are open 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Election Day. I will include the links on the site that I send this out on, and please go out and vote. So with that, Aodhan, thank you for joining us. All of you are so busy. We are recording this on Friday the 11th, so voting has started. So I know this is crunch time. So thank you for stopping by.
No problem. Like I said, I'm coming right now from work, and then I'm here for the next hour and a half or so. And then I got to hit the doors, and that doesn't stop through Thanksgiving weekend, which my family is thrilled about. So,
so hopefully this will be a
funny
relaxation bit for you in between all the crazy bits.
This is the best part of the day. Yeah.
Well, good. So the first question that I ask is a similar question to what I ask to authors when they come in. And so I'll ask you, instead of what your book's about, what is your candidacy about?
Well, look, I mean, I've been out now since April 2nd, so we're at I think it's like a day 190 or something. So I've
well, it sounds like a sentence.
No, I know it's been a long 6.5 months, but I could tell you that my day job is I'm a lawyer, and I hear a lot of the same complaints from my professional life as I do in the campaign life and in my personal life. I could tell you about that, and that's true. But honestly, the whole reason I started to run was just the enormous sense of frustration you get looking at council. And for various reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into.
We'll get into it, yes.
Yeah. But since I started knocking on April 2nd, everybody has the same feeling about council, and everybody has the same sets of frustrations about not feeling like their voice is heard, feeling like they view themselves more as trustees than representatives. They're just not doing the sort of nitty gritty constituency work that a local government's supposed to be really good at, actually. And we've moved farther away from that, and that is those frustrations, which are the same frustrations I felt for a long time. That's the reason I'm running. And over the last 6.5 months, a number of people have a number of different priorities. So I could talk to you about all sorts of different issues. But right now it's about, as sort of a theme to the campaign, about bringing it back to the doorstep and talking to people, doing a lot more listening and engagement than lecturing, and sort of just dealing with policy that's set from on high, and then going about the riding and telling them what's going to be happening rather than getting input first. So that's what the candidacy is about.
Nice. Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction there. First of all, where do you come from? Tell me a little bit about your background. Are you from here? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Your professional life so far?
So I grew up in Moncton. I moved to Nova Scotia when I was about 18.
Oh, I married a New Brunswicker, so well done. Another herring choker, from what I understand. They used to be called.
Listen. I have a lot of good things to say about New Brunswick, but as far as the city of Halifax is concerned, I also can see how bad governance can be. So
okay, so you were born in Moncton. Did you grow up there?
I grew up in Moncton. I moved to Nova Scotia. I was about 18. Went to Acadia in the Valley. Then I went to law school after I was done at Acadia. I was in law school for 3 years. I did my articles in Halifax. And then the last few years have just been working at my folks have a law firm out of New Brunswick, which we expanded in Halifax. So I'm in charge of running that branch that's down at the bottom of Sackville Street, and dealing with that management and then all of the various files and your day-to-day job as a lawyer.
And so what sort of law? Is it general or particular?
I do insurance law and injury predominantly. I've taken criminal files in the past. the most fun. I don't enjoy them, but it's a great way to learn the trial practice and to get in front of a judge, which is great. Those are good lessons to learn. But practice is 99% insurance law.
Great. And so, how do you think the skills and the experiences from working in the law are going to help you if you become a member of council?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't talk about it very much at the doorstep. I did at the beginning, and I had...
You don't want to spill that into people's houses,
well,
huh?
Nobody's perfect, Chris.
Right.
So I think at the very beginning I did, and then my team was like, maybe just wait until they ask. Because, some lawyers have a mixed reputation.
Yeah, what's the Shakespeare line? If you swing a dead cat, you'll hit a lawyer somewhere or something. Anyway,
yeah, and I can appreciate that. So
yeah. No, but honestly, what is it about what you've studied and your approach to your profession? How is that going to carry over to counsel?
I think there actually are advantages, and I think there are a few. I mean, the first is that there is sort of just the legal training that you get as far as procedure and how councils run, how motions are brought, how Robert's rules work.
Right. There are many lawyers in government. So maybe this is a dumb question, but I just wanted you to be able to speak to it.
No, listen. And then, of course, you understand how the council's bylaws work in relation to a provincial statute, a federal statute, or any of the regulations. So that is really helpful to know. And it's really important to know because, one of the most frustrating answers I sometimes hear from counselors, and sometimes you hear it from candidates and at the doorstep even, but people will say, well, listen, no, that's a provincial matter. That's a federal matter, which is frankly not usually the case. I mean, sometimes it technically can be the case that it would fall under this head of power that they scribbled down in 1867 in the Constitution Act. But for almost 100 years now, we have realized, since we've put in all these Great Society programs, that every government plays a little bit into every other government's zone of power, and that these aren't watertight compartments. And so we've had cooperative federalism in this country for 80 or 90 years.
And that seems like a key for the municipal, the provincial, and the federal to be working together.
Yeah, that's right.
And just about everything.
And so why it's useful, on that point specifically, but just the legal training, is it tells you, okay, well, you can know what you actually can accomplish as the city. And then when you know where the limits are, that turns into more lobbying and advocacy and making sure that you're lobbying the province for more authority if you need it, lobbying the federal government for more authority if you need it, and then using carrots and sticks to do that. So it helps you set strategy. But I think that's the first point. But the second point is that, law is just sort of a business at the end of the day. And what I've spent the last few years on, in addition to the practice and dealing with your 100, 110 clients, which has also been very useful when you're dealing with the constituents here, is just what the private sector can accomplish and what they're good at, because you're running the practice and you're paying the bills and you're trying to hire people for different things, and you need to figure out what the best quote is for a different job, and when you're getting a markup for something because they think some company's just going to pay it, which of course happens to government all the time. So on the business side of things, it's a huge help as well, because it helps you realize what the private sector is really good for, what to watch out for, and how you can accomplish some of the things the city wants to do.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Would you have, growing up or maybe in your adult life, is there a particular model that made you think, do you know what, I could make a difference in government? Would it be a politician, a national politician, a local politician, maybe somebody in your life? Would there be somebody that you could point to say, you know what, maybe I could do this?
Yeah, my grandfather on my father's side was a big impact. He was a judge, and he was an MP for a couple terms.
So this is from New Brunswick?
This is in New Brunswick.
New Brunswick.
He was an MP for a couple terms.
Oh, okay.
It was actually Westmoreland at the time.
What was his name?
Henry Murphy.
Murphy. Okay. Great.
And more importantly, he was an MP, and he didn't have portfolios, a backbencher, but really good at constituency work, good at talking to people.
And you knew him, obviously.
Yeah. I knew him very well, and but more importantly, just like a real character. And it really did show you how far just engaging with people, being as personable as you can be, don't get in fights unless you need to, just pick your battles
Nice.
wisely.
Nice.
That's really helpful in the political arena, especially when you're on council and you can bring emotion to make a change. You don't, unlike what some councilors will tell you don't have to wait for a staff report. But a lot of this work that you got to do is persuading other people, and just, be as good to people as you can be. Pick your battles wisely. You can cooperate with some people on some issues and other people on other issues. He was a big impact on me for that reason, just because he had a lot of personality and he was good at that nitty gritty work.
Sounds like he was a good guy. It's funny you say that, because the big figure in my life was my mother's father, my grandfather, who was an educator, first teacher, then a administrator, then he ran for local government. And I was lucky enough, sounds like you as well, that I grew up spending a lot of time with him. And I saw how he talked to people, and I saw how people reacted to him. And so that's nice. Yeah.
Teachers are always really great at local government because they have to do parent-teacher interviews.
The most exhausting experience in your life, let me tell you.
They have to have the tough conversations at the No, those are the best ones. They keep straight face.
At the end of the night, that almost always, that's when the teachers get together and go share a beverage somewhere, because it's
by the way, is a pretty useful thing that counselors should be doing more often. Like, you can actually learn a lot that way.
Yeah. Oh, well, good. So you mentioned at the beginning that one of the things that's really struck you is the frustration among people in the district before you ran and as you're going through doors. Tell me a little bit more about what are the frustrations you hear, and what do you think you can do about that?
Well, look, the city does a lot, probably too much, but you will hear from different people at the doors, everything from parking to potholes to traffic planning. I mean, the list is endless. But one of the things that really links it all together is there's a real sense that the council's just not listening, and that decisions are made or set from on high, and then the council will go about explaining to people or lecturing to people about what the city's doing, rather than it being the other way around, which is actually how city government should work, which is that the councilors, their job is no more, no less than being represented. We're supposed to represent the people at the doorsteps, and that's supposed to be the best part about a city government, is that you want to keep power local, close to home.
It's accessible. You know these people.
Your councilor right now is on Vernon Street. I mean, that's what people want. They know they can talk to the guy or the gal, and they can get some responses on the issues they care about. But more often than not, now what I hear is that people feel like when they're dealing with their counselor, and I'm not just talking about the current counselor here, but other counselors as well.
And this has been, and it's a no shade zone. So of course we're going to talk about issues, but it's not a place where we have to.
No, exactly.
Yeah, and I know you're not doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it feels like they're talking more to a federal minister rather than their city councilor. That's the overwhelming feeling I hear at the doors, but also in my personal life from other people and other areas they around.
So where do you think that comes from? And I know I'm not asking you to crawl in somebody's head, and we're not talking about specific people, but I've seen this before. So somebody gets elected to an office. Why do you think this is happening? Is it an overwhelming job? Does it become something else? Or do you have a sense of that? Because if you come in, you want to make sure this doesn't happen to you.
I think that the city is just, along with the challenges that they have faced, which are new to the region, the city's growing and it has a real opportunity to be an economic powerhouse here. Right. I think because we are facing these growing pains and challenges, the council has increasingly thought of itself as a body of trustees or technocrats, and that these issues are just too complex for voters, and that it's about making the best decision based on the evidence in the staff report rather than what people can see at the doorstep and what they care about and what they view as a common sense solution to things.
So instead of being a trustee, what's a better way to think about it?
A representative. A representative. And I think any time that an issue is overcomplicated, it's a very long way of saying, I don't have to listen to you. And if that's the feeling that people have at the doorstep, regardless of what the intention is of the representative, that's a problem. And as far as I think you said, how do you correct it? I think you need to have sort of common sense periodic but regular initiatives as a counselor to get in touch with people regularly. And look, social media is very helpful, but I don't think that it can at all replicate having engagement forums with people at St. Mary's or at Spencer House or any of these places around.
Nothing replaces face-to-face.
No, nothing at all.
Yeah.
And
we learned that from COVID, didn't we?
And I think if we spent just half as much time doing engagement meetings and forums and periodic door knocking as we did, on social media or Twitter or Facebook, which isn't at all representative of what people feel.
Right.
Even if your constituents disagreed with the decision that you made, there would be a lot less emotion behind it because people feel like they're not being heard, and that's one of the central things that I've heard on the campaign.
Right. People have. Yeah. So you mentioned this fact that there's so much information for counselors to take in, and so some of the gravitation has been towards being a trustee, and I just have to deal with this. But in looking at some of the information that's been thrown at you candidates, it seems overwhelming. So we have the suburban plan is 62 pages long. The integrated mobility plan is 182 pages long. The ongoing regional plan, phase 4 of it, 353 pages. The managed encampment plan, 59 pages. Now, I know that these are all put together by learned people. There's good stuff in here. I mean, people have been talking about these issues, but when all of those are stacking up, how do you take that and do anything with it as a counselor?
I think the first thing you have to ask is, what are the values of the constituents that I represent? What direction do they want us to move on a certain issue? And then when it comes down to very specific issues that have to be answered yes or no, you have to make sure that the feelings of your constituents line up with the decision that you're making, because they're not going to know necessarily the difference between ER3 in the zoning code now versus what it was 2 years ago, or what some of the R2 zoning is. Some of those changes are just granular, and people have jobs,
right?
But they need
and a
to know.
counselor's job is probably to make sense of that.
Exactly,
right?
But they need to know that the counselor that represents them has taken into account how they feel about these issues in general, what direction they want the city to move in on some of these issues in particular, and then account for that when they're making that specific decision that just might be too granular for an everyday voter, because an everyday voter is going to work at an office building in Burnside or going
They're busy
out to
during the
coffee.
day.
Yeah.
Right. And I know these questions for all the candidates, you haven't been in council yet, so I know you don't have a crystal ball or an easy button here. So why don't you start with let's talk about one of these issues that you think when you come in is going to be something that you're going to be pushing. And there's I know with the number of days you've been knocking on doors, all of you, there are certain issues that you could probably memorize your stump speech, but what's one of these issues that we can talk about that you think really needs to be addressed, and it's something that you're going to be able to point in the right direction when and if you get elected?
Homelessness and housing come up constantly. Homelessness now comes up.
Sure.
It is the number one issue.
Right.
And it's changed. People, as the campaign has moved along the last 6.5 months.
So where do you start with that? Because it just seems like something that has 100 different components.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the first thing you have to say is that this is a difficult problem to solve, and it's not going to be solved by some silver bullet in the course of a year.
And also, we know it's not just Halifax, it's not just cities in Canada, it's cities through the United States, it's worldwide.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But you have to ask, okay, well, how does the city put its best foot forward on the issue? And one of the most frustrating things, and maybe this is a failure of communication from the part of the city too, I don't know, but one of the frustrating points is that if you listen to the city's stated position, which is you want to drive up transitional units or your pallet homes, your tiny homes projects, you tie them to affordable housing, you keep people and you move people along the housing continuum, as it's called, and then once you have transitional units available and they're in the housing continuum, well then legally you're able to tamp down on the number of encampments. Most people actually agree with that. The problem is the city's had 5 or 6 years to deal with it, And everybody just saw the summer that we had here, where there was just a huge number of unsheltered people,
particularly in this district that you're running for, right?
Down the road. Down the road. So it's that's a major issue. Now,
so you mentioned that for 6-7 years this has been an issue and it's been growing.
Mm-hmm.
So has the group? So how do you help with this conversation?
Well, I think you have to start by saying that it hasn't been a helpful fact that the province, who have been procuring some of these transitional units, has really, really bungled the portfolio. And like you said, this is not something that is only endemic in Halifax. I mean, every city in North America is facing this
bungled
crisis.
the portfolio. You mean not enough, or that it's not rolled out in the right way?
Well, inexplicably, they're only buying, despite the fact that there is just a host of North American companies that'll sell these transitional units, or your pallet homes, your tiny homes projects, including Nova Scotia converted shipping containers. The province only buys from the same few suppliers, which doesn't make any sense because, well, number one, you're going to get the government markup with that, and number two, you're susceptible to the slowdown of that company based on the supply chain, and then the deliveries that the province get are pretty slow to non-existent, and so it's just difficult to get these units in. And so if you're able to have a Halifax-run procurement effort, like I talked about, this is one of the places where the city would have to lobby the province for a share in the funding that they've already set. So administratively, Halifax could run its own procurement effort and wouldn't require additional dollars from the province. They would share in the additional or the existing funding that's there.
So what does this take? Proactive discussions with the province?
It takes
from the municipal level.
It takes a real relationship between the province and the city, and we could talk about the strains on that relationship now.
Right.
But you need to have, I think, a Halifax-run procurement effort to get those units in, drive up the deliveries, install those units in less dense areas where you can centralize your government resources, which is one thing governments can actually do pretty well, is move the resources. So that, number one, you can give these people a chance. And number two, once those units are available, you can tamp down on the number of encampments so that people can enjoy their public spaces.
So do you think the mechanisms, the systems, the procedures are in place to do what you're talking about? I mean, this isn't impossible?
Well, it's not impossible. I mean, the number of companies that will sell you these units, as long as you diversified your supply and, of course, reduce the cost on government and created a more secure and consistent supply of these units, that would be a huge help to everyone. What it would take is a relationship between the city and the province. And I think the most generous thing that you can say, and I've spoken to some councillors about this, is that the most generous thing you could say right now between the city and the province is that there's no relationship. But more realistically, it's probably that the relationship is just very poor.
Just negative.
And so you need to have a more cooperative relationship with the provincial government in order to solve some of these issues.
Right. Thank you. So with homelessness, you've talked about what the government can do to provide supply, really. What about some of the other factors, whether it's affordable housing in the city and how people, if and how people are forced out, or vacant lots in the city, or these sorts of pieces? How does the affordability piece, do you think, play on homelessness? As a new person here, I drive around and I see high rise after high rise after high rise. I see vacant lot after vacant lot here in this district. And then people sleeping in the park. Now, relation between those? Any leverage points for councillors?
Yeah. Well, I would say two things.
And that's a huge question. So
no,
it's a buffet question.
That's fine. I'll answer it. I'll answer it in two ways. The first is that, and I've spoken to a lot of community leaders that are in touch with the unsheltered population on a daily basis. And what most of them will tell me is that we have created a world for various reasons where the on-ramps to becoming homeless, becoming an unsheltered person, are much, much wider. And housing is a significant part of that. Our vacancy rates are almost the lowest in the country. Our rental rates are rising at almost the fastest rate in the country.
Right.
That's a massive issue. Are the mental health issues that we have for various reasons are made worse in the last 20, 25 years. That's increased. the on-ramp to becoming an unsheltered person. So once you have come from a place where you had a stable roof over your head, and then you are now living in a shelter or in a tent, it is not as easy as then increasing the vacancy rate to what our historic average would be, let's say 3 or 4%, and then suddenly this population is just going to move from a designated encampment into a home. It's just not
here's
that
the supply.
easy.
Just jump in.
It's just not that easy. These people need help. And so, and that is true even if it wasn't a mental health issue that caused that person to end up on the street to begin with, because there's just tons of abuse that happens on the street. There's tons of trafficking, and people fall victim to all sorts of different things. And so once you are in an encampment, whether designated, undesignated, in a shelter, these people need help. And so we need to have federal resources, we need to have provincial resources, city resources, all together in a common front that will provide people the support they need. That's the first answer to your question.
So again, more communication between the different levels of government. Yeah.
Now, the second point about housing, how we can try to stop the what used to be a trickle of people that were falling through the gaps and then now are in a shelter, and how to make that less of a flow, which it is now, just a steady stream.
I mean, it's so tough to find housing, as you know. I moved here last August. We looked for a place. We're going to buy a place. Ooh, wow, the prices are too crazy. We looked at rental places, and we were 10th in line looking at a rental house. Now, luckily, we were adults who had owned homes, and so the owner said, "Ooh, you take it." But just that really hit me at the beginning. I have a college-age son who's 3 years in college. He goes elsewhere, but he's here for an internship. He's starting to look around at the rents, and it's crazy. So that must, those levels, the level where I'm looking, the level where my son's looking, students, that must filter down then to the people that are on the edge, and pretty easy to, you mentioned it, I like that metaphor of the widening ramps, but you're falling off a cliff. It's happening more and more, isn't it?
I mean, they took an on-ramp that was probably, a single lane. They turned it into an 8-lane highway. I mean, right. and a huge part of that falls on the housing issue. So to go back to the housing file and to make sure that we can have this become less of a steady flow, I'm sort of someone that believes in a, throw the kitchen sink at it mentality, which is to say that there are solutions and policy proposals from all sides of the political spectrum that are helpful here. Right. And to the credit of both Wei and Andy as mayoral candidates, both their housing policies are pretty good. And Wei's in particular talks about establishing an arm's length agency, a sort of a housing Halifax, that would centralize many of the city's efforts in dealing with your private sector, your cooperatives, your nonprofits, and would also be able to, and I'm not sure his part of the platform says this, but at least this is my view, that agency, an arm's length agency, would be able to provide specialized advice to council on how to reduce red tape to make sure that you actually get shovels in the ground. That's pretty good. And so something like that, centralize the city's efforts and then be able to provide advice to council on a portfolio that is quite difficult and multifaceted, and how you actually cut some of that red tape. That's just not the specialization that council is really capable of. So having a body there that would be able to provide that advice, that I think could be very helpful in reducing some of the difficulties in cutting some of that red tape, because there's always going to be a side of the aisle that tells you, well, if you cut that red tape, then developers are going to take advantage of it, landlords, and they might be right. But if you have the authority of a specialized institution that can make a recommendation like that, I think it would really pave the way to some more meaningful change on the housing file.
And you've talked about increased communication and relationships. You've talked about relationships between levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal. Here's another one, relationship between legislative and executive, right? Making sure that these are happening. You talked about the different ways to get at the affordable piece, and one big issue, as you well know, here in town, I think that I've seen your name mentioned a couple of times with this particular issue, and that was the density issue and the accelerator fund. And as I've learned about this, my understanding is that now the accelerator fund is in place, and that in many ways has taken over. It's taken over for the regional plan in terms of how the city, how this district views density. So tell me about that. Are we in good shape with this? Do we have to tweak it? Do we now have our path forward?
Well,
in terms of the accelerator fund. Again, a huge, wide question for you.
No, that's fine. We certainly need to tweak it. And even if the city told you that this was the path forward, now that's also what they said.
Well, when money is dangled, people jump, right?
No, that's true. And I could get to the relationship between the Housing Accelerator Fund contract and the zoning changes. But I think the biggest problem with those zoning changes, we could bicker about the policy. Like, it can get really granular, and I'm happy to discuss that. But it's just that there was no consultation whatsoever. And even if you ask the city, they'll tell you it was an expedited consultation, and we needed the expedited consultation because we had to get the HAF funding.
So why so quick? Was it political? We want to support this national group? Was it, hey, we'll take the money? Many things?
I think governments very quickly tried to grapple with the fact for 30 years.
There's an answer.
They didn't have a housing policy. I mean, really, like at all levels of government didn't have a housing policy.
Right.
For 30
so
years.
It's in many senses reactive rather than proactive.
Yeah, it's actually it's a crazy fact that the federal government, the provincial government just really didn't look at this file for that long until it became a very big issue. Yeah. And so we try to grapple with it. Listen, I respect that the city took the issue seriously. The problem that I have is, number one, that the consultation effort was really limited. And what people at the doorstep will tell you is that this was just a legal checkbox, first of all. But there was a feeling that, well, this is just a checkbox to let staff do whatever they were going to do anyway. And that puts staff in a completely untenable position.
Because the staff are doing the most of the work here.
And then they're being blamed for a job that was council's to begin with. Right. And I was always in favor of a council directing the councilors through a motion to each have engagement meetings, neighborhood by neighborhood. You have the staff member that's assigned to the councilor at the time drafting what we heard report, and that councilor would bring the report to a public session of council, and then you would ask the staff to amalgamate those reports into a new draft plan. And that's the process I'm in favor of for amendments, because that's how policy is supposed to be set. It's supposed to be set by the council, and then the civil service will bring recommendations and direction on how it should be implemented. And they're extremely useful in that regard. But here it happened in exactly the opposite way.
So the
recommendation was brought, and then it was sort of a lecturing campaign on this is what we're going to do.
So the path was accelerated and not enough time was taken, but here we are. So you get into council. How do you deal with this? Is this what's the way forward with this? I mean, if you can speak to that.
Well, first step is to bring a motion as a councilor that would direct those councilors, like I said, to have neighborhood by neighborhood engagement meetings, bring those reports to council, followed by...
So get some input from the people in the different areas, because each district and each neighborhood is going to have a slightly different view on this.
And then it would be followed by a recommendation once those, what we heard reports were brought to council, to ask staff to amalgamate them into a draft amendment plan. And that's just basic constituency work. Now, as far as that motion is concerned, any councilor can bring it. But then it becomes that persuasion effort that we talked about, where you need to forge relationships with other councilors.
With somebody from the suburbs, with somebody from a rural area, right?
Absolutely.
What, there are 13 councilor seats? Do I have that right in HRM?
Within the HRM,
yeah.
16.
16. Okay.
16 councilor
right.
seats. I hope I didn't get that.
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah, but it's a large number where coalitions have to be built.
That's right. Sure. So you gotta get your names, but also at the same time, at the very beginning of that session, when people are fresh and they've just been elected,
you have your energy.
That's exactly when you want to bring that motion. You want to be able to do it.
Well, the honeymoon period, right? The first 100 days, you have your,
absolutely. So that's my position on the plan. Now, just to touch, I don't want to nag on the issue too long, but
this is your forum. If there's something that you want to say, yeah.
Look, I mean, you look at the Housing Accelerator Fund contract, and what council will tell you, and this is sometimes in the media as well. The council needed to pass the zoning changes as they were passed in early June, or could have been late May, of 2024 because they needed to access the Housing Accelerator Fund money. Well, the Housing Accelerator Fund contract required a number of different efforts. The most important was to create 4 units as of right within the city, which our city interpreted as within the urban service boundary. Well, the zoning changes that we passed actually did much more than that. And so the zoning changes as they were passed were not necessary to access that funding, and you could have limited it. And then, of course, that housing
So we went
accelerator
beyond
fund,
the minimum of what was necessary.
That's right.
To,
and then, of course, that housing accelerator fund contract can always be negotiated with because that's what's required between a city and the federal government. So that was a piece of it that was frustrating just as a lawyer reading the contract. But because you're not able to parse out which counselors actually know that isn't what was required, and which didn't, and which maybe just misunderstood. And when it was passed unanimously, I could tell you that the people in this area were incredibly disappointed.
Right. Yeah. That's I attended a couple of the meetings here in the discussions. So do you know that this money that Halifax, that HRM gets for agreeing to this accelerator, whatever it is, 40,000? No, it's whatever the amount is. Where's that money go? That just goes into the budget of the city?
It goes to the city. The city will tell you that it takes that funding and then it pushes it to various housing efforts. But at the end of the day, it's going into city coffers.
Yeah.
And so whether or not that funding will help with the city efforts is yet to be seen. I'm sure to a certain extent it will. But many of the housing solutions that we need today isn't really about just pumping money into it. It's about common sense solutions on how you can reduce wait times and how you can make some of the permit standards more transparent. It's really about making the process easier so that you can build affordable houses, so you can build modular prefabricated homes in a more coherent way with the city, with the provincial standards. And the labor code being amended to make that easier. And the mayoral candidates will talk all about this. But I'm not sure just pushing money at this issue is going to suddenly create a vacancy rate of 3 or 4%. I think you really need to get to the brass tacks and make it easier to build and put shovels in the ground.
Yeah. You mentioned in talking about density and the different councillors and the different constituencies. Density in Dartmouth or Spryfield or Bedford, how is that important for your district? I mean, what's the relationship there?
Well, one of the most granular policies that you can even develop as a city is planning. It is your zoning policy, right? Because it's street by street, sector by sector.
Now, do I have this right? Basically, when you ask what power does a councillor have, the answer I get over and over again is the zoning plan. I mean, that's what you guys you men and women can do, right? So this is the leverage point.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so if the question is, what does the Dartmouth zoning have to do?
Exactly. Sorry to interrupt. I'm a master at that. but yeah, it's not just density in District 7, but there's a lot of talk about density in Dartmouth and density in Bedford, and that's going to help the people that live here.
A good plan is a plan that reflects the views of the community around it, and that doesn't mean that everybody gets what they want. Like the way that these engagement meetings should have happened, in my view, if the councilors had gone and held engagement meetings neighborhood by neighborhood, if you want a growth plan, is just not rush it through and panic. But to be very thoughtful about the process and say, okay, we all need to create more units. We need to create a space for growth in this city because it's going to create a whole lot of economic opportunities for young people coming here. We're not only not going to have a brain drain if we become an economic hub, but we could actually recruit talent from elsewhere.
I mean, we're lucky enough to live in a city where people want to move here.
Exactly.
This is a good thing.
Better social services, better delivery. How are we going to do this? And how will this neighborhood tolerate growth? What does growth look like in the Hydrostone? What does growth look like near Point Pleasant? What does it look like closer toward Burnside? I mean, you can have a plan that reflects the views of the community and that is able to accommodate for the kind of growth we're seeing without making it uniform, which is exactly the opposite of what a plan, a fair zoning plan should be. I mean, these things are supposed to be very granular. They're not supposed to make massive sweeping changes, and that's what a thoughtful plan should have looked like. But that takes a lot of time.
Right. Talking about zoning in the suburbs and the relationship with zoning in the city, how people get around transportation. I know. I used to live in San Francisco, and I'm glad I don't live there anymore because the traffic was terrible. A lot of people liked living there. A lot of people are moving to this area, and they're bringing their cars. And I can see it when I drive in the morning to drop off my wife and my son at Ombre Academy across the way. There are more cars on the road, and it's very frustrating for everybody. Like the housing one, wow, it's this big ball of a mess with many different parts of it. How do you talk about that to people when you say, I'm going to help you out, or I'm going to come on the council? Where do you start with it?
On transit?
Yeah, transit, because it could be public transportation, it could be limiting cars, it could be bikes, it's all sorts of stuff, right?
Look, transit is going to be essential if we're going to have a large city that's able to bring people in.
It's livable that people want to be,
and get people out. So I'm in favor of applying a uniform set of standards to the transit authority. You could have, and it would be very common sense. What are the safety measures? What is your ridership like? Are you focusing on peak times with people that are getting from work or from home to work at 7:30 to 9 o'clock in the morning, getting from work to home from 3:30 in the afternoon to 6:30 at night? And are you improving on those standards on a periodic basis of 12 months? And we're able to monitor that in a normal way.
So the idea of taking data and acting on it.
And
because that must be happening now.
They regularly will report, the transit authority will report to council, but one of the frustrating things is that you'll have the transit authority appear in a budget adjustment meeting or something like this, and they'll ask to pilot express routes, which didn't work before COVID, or another measure rather than focusing on the common sense, reliable transit standards that any good transit system needs to focus on in order to get people from point A to point B. And if the council, and they do this, sets these standards in their strategic documents to focus on peak times, reliability, safety, and the transit authority comes back and are asking to do express routes and other measures that haven't worked in the past, then you have to start looking at a leadership shakeup if necessary, or how you can improve the management of the transit authority. Because right now we have a situation where the transit system is unreliable during the peak times where people really need it.
People are well, there's traffic. People are waiting for buses forever.
That's right. Yeah. And leaving, in my own experience, as a lawyer in the city, and are leaving people in a lot of unsafe conditions. And I have a few clients that have had incidents on the bus itself. I have had, of course, clients that have been struck by Halifax buses, and I'm not blaming the drivers. The drivers are very stressed. They're overworked. Right. They're trying to get through a
maneuvering
system.
Traffic in narrow streets and streets that were meant for horse and carriage, and driving a bus around. Oh my goodness!
A traffic system that wasn't designed for cars, let alone diesel buses since the early 1970s. I'm not blaming them.
Yeah, right.
But we do need to have a management system at the transit authority that can address some of these
issues.
So
how does it work? Is there an appointed? Does the mayor appoint? Does the council appoint the person who runs the transit authority, or is this a set group of civil servants who are there always?
They're part of the executive branch. So the legislative body.
So part of the cabinet of the mayor will be you're running transit.
That's right, but the legislative body is able to set those standards on them without any difficulty at all.
Okay.
And is able to pass either motions or bylaws that will protect a rider. So that's what I'm in favor of, because we clearly need to have this issue addressed if we're going to be at soon 550,000, 600,000 people in the HRM.
Right.
And if we don't address it, then we're having people either stuck in traffic in an economy that's increasingly unproductive compared to the United States. That's not great. or are choosing to live elsewhere. And that's the last thing we want. We want to be able to have people that can live in Halifax, for it to be affordable, for it to be reliable. I mean, that's what every city wants, and that's something that we're capable of doing. But I don't want to continue spinning our tires on the transit issue.
Right. What about what role do bikes have in this? Is I've heard some people say this city is not Copenhagen. It's never going to be a place where people ride bikes. Others say, well, we just have to put in more bike lanes. And I know it's not a simple answer, but is this another component here that will help? Are we in the right direction? I mean, I see some bike lanes, but then they seem to be, they end in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I don't know enough about it. But
I'm in favor of an investigation by the staff to look at models, particularly outside of North America, that may be useful in the implementation of bike lanes.
There's plenty of cities where bikes work and people are on them. That's for sure.
Vancouver and Victoria are good models for some things. They're not good models for all things. And when you're looking at a city like Halifax with a lot of historical considerations, where we're not able to widen the streets, we have narrow streets that, like you mentioned, weren't exactly built for cars. You would be looking at cities in Europe that have faced these problems and have managed to build biking infrastructure that can navigate without clogging up the traffic system. And part of that is dependent on the area of the city. Like, you know, when you're looking at streets with large sidewalks but with very little pedestrian foot traffic, then you could do like Germany does and make half of that sidewalk a bike lane. They shouldn't all be built the same. And I knew bike lanes would come up at the beginning of the campaign. I had no idea how much bike lanes would come up from cyclists who would tell me the bike lane is far away from the rest of the road, and so I'm going straight and cars are turning right in front of me. And so we have to make it safe for cars, we have to make it safe for cyclists, but more importantly, we have to be able to build biking infrastructure so that traffic continues to flow and cyclists are kept safe. And right now, it often feels like in various areas of the city that those are competing interests, and they don't have to be.
Yeah, thank you. An issue that comes up, and as a new person, I think, what does it mean? A question of, well, what is your issue on police reform? And I'm not going to ask you, what is your stance on police reform? I'm not going to ask you that, but how should a constituent in this district be thinking about what police reform means?
One of the values, one of the greatest value adds that having the Halifax Regional Police is in comparison to other places. And I grew up in Moncton, where it was just the RCMP. We used to have a Moncton Municipal Force. And
oh, really?
Now it's just RCMP, which it really leads to a situation where it doesn't feel like you have a real community police force. So that's what the HRP can be really good at, is making it feel that they are from and reflect that the community that they police. And right now, and the council's dealt with police chief selection, but one of the things I would really like to see is an HRP that does a better job at communicating with the public directly. They do have from what I can tell, from what I've heard from counselors, have a healthy relationship with the council, and they're very responsive. But I would like to see more public outreach directly to the public from the HRP, rather than having to be filtered through City Hall.
And that probably means more policemen walking around that know an area and the people know them. I imagine. I mean, and all that takes is money, but it seems you hear that city after city, where the more the police are part of the community and tied in with the businesses and tied in with the issues on the street, it's of course going to be easier.
Oh, and it will, if you have a good relationship between the police and the greater community, when there are flare-ups and police are put in difficult positions in 2021.
Well, housing puts police in an impossible
that's
position.
That's exactly what I was about to get to. Then you have a public that can appreciate that police are put in an extremely difficult position. But if you know the officers that are put in a difficult position or dealing with a difficult issue, and you know them because they're in your community, they're at your coffee shop, they've known your family, then you're less likely to have eruptions in public unrest about whatever the difficult issues of the day is that the police are involved in. We saw this in 2021 on Spring Garden when some of these encampments were being shut down, vacated. So we need to have a community police force that really focuses on that direct relationship with the public, so that when issues flare up, and they always will, it is more of a bump in the road rather than a news story for 7-10 days.
Right. Thank you. We have people. Fact of life here is that more and more people are moving to the city. This is a place where people want to move to. There are opportunities. You're a relatively young man. I talk to a lot of people in the store that grew up here and say, this city is not what it used to be. That used to be a hospital over there. That used to be a building, and it's changing, and I don't understand it. I've just moved here, and I think, wow, what an amazing city. But I don't have anything to compare it to. How is the city doing, in your opinion, on going forward and innovating and making sure that that it has all the pieces that a modern city has, but also retaining the unique aspect of the city? This is a big cruise ship port, and you hear a lot that, hey, as you drive in, all the ports look alike, really. And how does is the city doing okay? And again, as much as you can address this, how is the city doing with balancing those two? And I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but how do you think that's going in terms of a city growing and creating infrastructure that suits the amount of people coming in, but also retaining the cool parts about what makes this is one of the oldest cities in North America?
Well, I can talk about how the city's doing, but I think the more important question is, how is the city going to do? Because bringing in all of these people, which is absolutely great as far as creating an economic hub, and like I talked
people
about,
from all over,
brain drain, and I'm not from. I only moved to Nova Scotia when I was 18. I love Halifax. I love it. I love the people here. I love the city. It's great. But once we're bringing in all those people, about preserving some of the best aspects of the city, which are, number one, the people, number two, some of the history and the character that we have in the region, I think it's important that they prioritize, number one, the history and the heritage, have more public events where we celebrate the history of Halifax, and make that an important part of any newcomer's journey into Halifax. Right now, I don't see as much as I would like. There are heritage conservation districts, which I think are important.
We're in one here, Schmidtville.
Exactly. And I think we've done a fair job with that, but at the same time, we are going to see a number of newcomers over the coming 5 or 10 years. And it's important to celebrate the history of Halifax so that they understand where the city has come from and where the city is going, and that they're welcome here. But part of that has to be that we're celebrating the city culture more, and that we're celebrating some of the history and heritage around, whether it's Schmidtville or going up to Citadel Hill. I think that has to be part of council's agenda.
Yeah. Thanks. I know. Thanks for putting up with my very general questions that are all over the place.
All right.
Can you tell me something that's really surprised you from all the doors you've knocked on? This experience of running for office. What's something that you not at all expected, and like, wow, this is really something?
I've been around politics a lot as a kid. I've worked on a number of campaigns, provincial campagns.
Talked about your grandfather.
Yeah, and Liberal campaigns, BC campaigns, and Green. Almost all of them. So
you're kind of a political junkie, huh? You've grown up. Well, you're interested in it.
Yeah, I'm interested in it. I've worked on all sorts of different campaigns. But knocking doors for the first time, it still somehow is a surprise that 90, I'm not going to say 100, but 99% of people are very patient, very friendly, and actually do want to talk about the issues. And when they haven't thought about it yet, they'll tell you they haven't thought about it. They'll say, well, what do you think about this? And you learn a lot from voters. They have a lot of of solutions and thoughts on issues that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of, which is upsetting that, in my view, at least council has sort of left a lot of that behind over the last 8 years. But the people are by far the best part of the campaign. You get to talk to them every day.
Mm-hmm.
Some doors are definitely better than others, but I am still somehow surprised after all of those campaigns how helpful people are to me, how patient they are. I mean, my campaign team is chock full of people I've only met in the last few months. So you really it does bring out sometimes the best of people, the best ideas, and they're all incredibly patient.
Yeah. Well, nice. This is how democracy is supposed to work, right? And it seems that when we look worldwide, democracy is on its heels, and you see a lot of examples of, wow, it's just going to work. So that's nice to hear. Finally, and I know you're so busy, all of you, and after this, you're going to go knock on doors. But could you share with us something that you've read recently or a while ago, or something you've watched on the small screen, watched on the big screen, or a podcast, something you've seen or heard that was so cool you'd like to pass on to somebody?
What kind of answer are you looking for? You want like a TV show, or do you want a news podcast?
Well, anything. I'd love a book, but I'm sure you don't have time to sit around and read books. So that's why I widened this to it could be anything that you've read or watched that was so cool you would like to share with others. Like, hey, you should either read this or watch this.
I reread for no particular reason To Kill a Mockingbird in the last month and a half.
Okay, nice.
I read it. I think when I was 12 or 13.
Then I was forced to read it. I think sophomore year in high school. But yeah.
But an excellent classic.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
So what struck you about it? Oh, that's cool.
There are certain criticisms of the book I think that are merited. There's whitewashing there that I don't think is the best portrayal today, but it
and
does.
A product of the times. There's a lot there.
But the complexity of the characters, I find really enjoyable. I think as a young man, the reason I really enjoyed it is that you read character. At that point, you're only used to very simple books where characters are just they're set in their ways, and that's how it is. And what I like about that read is that over the course of the novel, you learn more and more about people, and you realize that everyone's sort of complex and has different things to add.
Nice.
That's I think why I like it. And during the campaign, that's been kind of interesting because you're again, when you're meeting people at the doors, whether it's your first time at their door or the third time at their door, you're adding more and more, and they're giving you more ideas and they're talking to you, and it's been great.
Well, thank you for that. And that's a book that's beloved by many, and it's fun. What I think of when you mentioned that, I love the book, I love the movie, but I kind of cursed it for a while because I felt that for a period of time, maybe 15, 20 years ago, every third person I met, a new baby was named Scout. And
my dog is named Scout. My dog is named Scout. I named my dog Scout. I got him a few years ago, and I had the name Scout picked out. I swear to God, this is true.
So you had it before you read it?
No. I got the dog after, but I knew I was going to name my dog Scout because I liked the name so much.
Yeah.
And it was after I read the book when I was in the 10th grade.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, Aodhan, thank you for your patience. You're very busy, all of you. This is and here we are. Voting is happening. I want to wish you the best of luck, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate it.